Welcome back to the Frazer podcast. Today we get to speak with Ashley Koff, who's a registered dietitian. She's also one of the top nutritionists in the country. In addition to a host of major corporate clients, Ashley advises many Hollywood and TV productions on better nutrition. She's the author of 2 books and acts as a spokesperson for many brands. She launched her Ashley Koff approved brand to house the many facets of her practice. She joins us today to talk about nutrition and business. Welcome aboard, Ashley.
Thank you.
So, Ashley, when it comes to being a nutritionist or a dietitian, when do people make the decision to come see you?
I would say that the majority of people are coming to see me based on some stimuli, right? And so that's a very, very general answer. But, you know, that stimuli could be that they have a friend or a family member or they themselves have gotten a health diagnosis. And that health diagnosis could be a great one, like, hey, I'm pregnant, or it could be, you know, an unfortunate one, I'm sick, or, you know, I went to see my doctor and things aren't going in the right direction, and before medication, I'd like to come see you, or I'm going to have to take medication. I want to understand what that means dietary-wise as well.
So lots of different stimuli. Living in, sort of a Sex and the City world here in New York, a lot of people I run into see nutritionists because they're either looking to lose weight, change their appearance, get more energy. How do you get them to think about their goals? And in some sense, how do you inject realism into their thinking? And if they're focused on a number on the scale, how do you maybe shift them to think more on performance or energy types of goals?
Yeah, and a lot has changed, right? So I started down this path about 20 years ago, and really preceding that was my own personal interest. I had what I came to understand was digestive issues, from really having had a lot of antibiotics as a kid. And this is a fun story for a second. I was in Manhattan right after college, and was like at my wit's end of kind of like, why am I just not feeling well? I've tried sort of every diet or semblance of what I thought of as better nutrition at the time, and things weren't working for me. As you said, like it was the trifecta. It was my energy. It's like I don't like where the scale's going, and oh, by the way, I'm training for a marathon. Like, how is this, not all working? And I found myself in like a woo-woo doctor, and not even a doctor. She called herself some sort of a healer. And the next thing I know, I'm on a 7-day goat's milk cleanse. And so that nobody thought that I was weird, even took goat's milk to the White Horse Tavern and had them put it in a short glass with an ice cube in there, and was like, well, maybe people think I'm drinking the, White Russian. So, like you have your own pieces of this. And so I remember all of that. And so one of the pieces that I will say is I'm never stepping in the position and trying to change what somebody's goals are. But what I do want them to understand are the physiologic ramifications of those goals. And when we have a conversation, what are you really looking for? So I think it's amazing if you have a goal. I really try to separate out, like, is it a dream or is it a goal? If you're here to see me, I operate in the world of goals, which means that we're going to put a roadmap together. But in order to do that, I have to assess where you are right now. And so that assessment, I think, is probably one of the things that yields the greatest ability for a patient working with me to really see me as a partner in this space and to take that partnership. And I think they give me probably a bit of faith and hope in the beginning. And then when they start to hear me connect the dots, then it's like, oh, wow, I've never had somebody ask me both about, did I have ear infections as a kid, and did I have skin issues as an adolescent, and did I take birth control, right? Or like any combination. And when I start to ask those questions and then say to them, hey, you've been telling me that you haven't been able to get the scale down, but you're also telling me, I'm looking at your food, you're eating, you're exercising. Do you feel like are you bloated? Are you, this kind of a thing? We'll have those conversations. And so by really talking to people and having people assess themselves and to do so with my help and guidance, that usually gets them to a place where they're like, wow, I now understand the total picture. And I think that a big part of that is very few people that come in to see me today have not tried something else before. Like, I don't get somebody who, and whether you're seeing me as a patient or whether you're interacting with me at a lecture or somebody in the audience of a TV show or wherever I'm connecting with you, I promise you, and that is very different than when I started out as a practitioner, but I promise you today that you've tried at least one thing, if not several things. And so what I think that hopefulness and also tinged with a bit of failure, I think it's really important, or feeling like things have failed or even that you are a failure. And so I try to shift that mentality also, that it's like actually other things have failed you and you're not the failure. So long way around of answering that I think the key thing is, look, if somebody's goal is a number on a scale, or, I worked in Hollywood for a long time, if somebody's goal is to not get, not be on an award show, not be called out for having, their body not look the way that Hollywood wants them to look or whatever, I honor that, but it's really, I want them to really do it in a way that is helpful, and that's actually how I started my practice. My first couple of clients were like A-listers, super surprising, weird, it was like a Duke referral to me, and it was a film, and actually a couple of guys had to lose weight and have a very dramatic weight loss through the film, and I ended up working with them for like all of $100 to just make sure that, we didn't also hurt their liver and also didn't have them look badly into their next project or have any health issues going into their next project. So, I have to accept what somebody's and really respect what somebody's goal is, but I'm not the person to come to if you don't care about the health impact of what you're doing, then don't come to me.
So when you're getting into the process of assessing people, do you do the thing you'd see on Access Hollywood where you go into the refrigerator and start tossing things out? How much of that is part of it? And then you're asking people to assess themselves. Are you a big proponent of sort of high-end journaling to make sure people are tracking what they're eating, what they're doing, what their habits are? And then once you've got that information, how does that figure into your calculus and to help them generate a program for themselves?
Yeah, well, I can say that I've actually been on Access Hollywood throwing out stuff, been on reality TV shows doing that. There's a lot of stuff we do for TV and for drama, and it can be fun. But the reality of it is, and with the self-assessment, some people do great with journaling. The one thing I will say is that you do have to assess where you are. So the mistake that people make, whether it's picking up books or whether it's overhearing a program or sitting down and talking with somebody about a program and just starting it, is that's not informed by who you are right now, and as a result, you're not going to get better results. And so I just have created the Road Trip to Better Health workbook, which is a workbook and audio program, so that more people who don't have access to me for a consult can do this program that I've been doing for 20 years. And one of the reason I chose the road trip analogy is I think it's really important in this one. It's like we all have, our cars are all different. They may be in varying degrees of functioning, age, shape, all of that stuff. But before you're going to go on a road trip, you're going to figure out, okay, how's my car working for me? Like how much space do I have in the trunk? Like what, do I have all the stuff I need? And so we do have to do that assessment. So for some people, it might be being in their home and saying like, okay, let me talk to you about let's take an overall look at what you're doing and let's see what you're already doing better, because I've never in my entire career had a patient that is a total health hot mess. There's something that they're already doing better. And so with that, I want to build on that because it is easier. I've studied a lot of, I'm not a behavioral psychologist, but I've studied a lot of both in the business world and also in the personal world, how to actually create behavior change, because I realized very early into this, and probably through my own experience, that just giving information is not going to create behavior change. We wouldn't have smokers. We wouldn't have people that drove without their seatbelts. We wouldn't have a lot of things going on, if information was just the answer. And so in that behavior change mode, I want to look at what you're already doing well, and I actually ask people about that on an intake form. And so one of the biggest clues is that if you don't do the intake form for me and you don't send it in, then you get a nice note, even if you have a scheduled appointment, you get a nice note from my team saying, so reschedule for when you have time to do the intake form, because I can't meet you where you need to be. Like, I can't do this all for you. So I don't come into your house and actually throw stuff away. What I do is I come into your house and explain to you why we might want to buy and make better choices. And in very specific instances, and usually in the space of dietary supplements, will I say, absolutely not, I'm not letting you take that, or I'm not having you use that. Sometimes people are even like, oh my gosh, I just want to throw all of this away. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. Why don't we work with this stuff, and then let's get, when you make your choice the next time, whether that's food, whether that's skincare, whether that's dietary supplements, then I'll say, why don't we make better choices the next time? And the reason for that is I believe that we do better when we set the standard at what I call better, not perfect choices more often. You asked about journaling, and basically, I just see that just like learners, we all learn differently. Like some of us love podcasts, some of us like to read books, some of us don't want to do any of that and want to watch it on TV. And so what I really look for is what's going to get me the information that I need in order to have an ongoing ability to assess what you're doing, and also what is going to hold you to a place where you can assess yourself. And that's really the role of the journal, and journaling is the one thing across the board that always works. And the reason for that is that accountability, but it's also when we start to stress out and say, like, I just don't know why I'm not losing weight on the scale, I may as well eat a burger, you can actually send that, what you've been doing to me, or I've been getting it, and I can say, well, actually, here's what hasn't been working. And if you want a burger, here's how we have a better burger, right? And so it just is about reducing some of the drama and anxiety and like that, giving up that happens so often, that because we are starting to, hit into a failure spot. And then the additional piece of documenting everything that is so critical is I do a lot of I'm sort of the quarterback, if you will, for the healthcare team a lot of times. It's my integrative medicine, integrative nutrition training, but also if I'm making referrals, if I'm sending you to your doctor to say, hey, can you get your vitamin D checked? Or, hey, let's go to this trainer. Are you doing more push-ups? Are you doing more, that kind of a thing. And so I want to have all of that information in one place, and I recommend that you do as well. And so that part of the journaling, and I even, as part of my online membership, I have the Better Checkup Checklist, which I have my patients and anyone who's a member take into their doctor, and they also do work beforehand, but it's so that you get better results. So if you have the information that you need, then we can, and if I have the information I need, then we can work better. It's just like how you go to the office, right? It's like you wouldn't look at a financial deal. I'm about to enter a territory I know nothing about, but you wouldn't look at a financial deal and just be like, okay, cool, I think I'm just going to throw, $100,000 at that, and I'm going to pass on this one. You'd be like, okay, let me see let me understand the deal, let me understand what its future potential is, and then let me also look at where I am. Like, equity is great, but if I have no cash right now, I'm going to have to make a different decision. And so I think that, when we look at it maybe in ways that are different from thinking about it as our health or our nutrition, it becomes about doing the homework you need to do to get better results.
So that leads into another thought that I have here. When you get information from doctors, how much information is enough? I imagine at some point, even doctors aren't necessarily testing for the endocrine system or elevated levels of this or that. They almost have to know what questions to probe into. And I guess that ties into your integrative approach, where you've got the set of questions that you'd like to see answered. But ultimately, how does that integrate well with a doctor that isn't used to working with a nutritionist in a more formal way?
Yeah, and I'm super grateful that more and more today doctors are working with dietitians, with nutritionists, with health coaches. I created my online membership so that any doctor can work with their patient in this way, because I know, and I saw this firsthand in the first 10 years of my work, I was referred by doctors so often, and they were like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. And I even had patients, again, it was LA or it was New York, who paid me to go to their doctor's appointment with them, and I've reached a point in my life where I'm not going to go to doctor's appointments with my patients, but I can do it now. And also, thankfully, we have all these virtual capabilities. You do get better outcomes when your doctor has better information about you specifically. And I'll tell a little story that can reveal just how important this is. I had seen a patient a couple years before, super wonderful, very healthy woman, came to me at like 79, 80, and had never taken a medication her whole life. She said, I'm just slowing down a little, but I have grandchildren around, in different parts of the world, so I do travel a bit. But, I go walking, and I volunteer here, and I do all this. So I said, so could we make this consult about me actually asking you what you did for your life? Because when I'm 80, I want to be like you, right? And so we talked about it, and what ended up being revealed was that she was having some digestive issues, and primarily they were because she wasn't used to being as sedentary, and long flights around the world were causing her system, and in particular, from a digestive standpoint, she was more backed up. So she was constipated. She was like, what should I be doing? And so we talked about that, and I gave her some recommendations from a food standpoint, as well as a supplement standpoint. And it was interesting at that point in time, she had told me that she had gone to see a chiropractor who had just kind of been helping her back and some of that stuff. And so great. She comes to see me. I'd forgotten about her maybe 3 or 4 years later, and she was a mess. She's so upset. And she said, Ashley, I just left the doctor, and I'm on 2 heart medications for high blood pressure, and now I'm so anxious that they're talking to me about, like, maybe that I need an anxiety medication, and I don't understand, and I just feel like I made a deal with my doctor that if I came to see you, that maybe there's something I'm doing nutritionally that means that I cannot be on these blood pressure medications. So I said, okay. So I evaluated her, what she was eating and drinking. We talked about everything. We talked about her lifestyle. And I said, so the only thing I can offer you right now is there is a breath that I learned from Dr. Weil years ago. And he actually, before he puts someone on high blood pressure medication, as far as I understand, that he will have somebody work on doing this breath work as a series. And I said, so I can't say that for your doctor, but I can tell you, let's start doing this and let's make an agreement with your doctor that, we'll continue to assess and let's just get you off this medication, right? And certainly off 2 of them. And first and foremost, let's address your anxiety. And I jokingly said, because your anxiety is going to just make you constipated again, and I made a joke about it. And then she said, well, that's so funny. I've got no problems there because, remember, that's even why I came to see you originally. And I started having that problem again. I said, oh, really? And she said, yeah. And I said, and I'd already been through her supplements and her food and everything. And I said, when was that? And she said, well, it was about, and she goes, it's so funny. It was like right before I went to see my doctor. And I said, oh, and I said, well, how did you resolve it? And I said, did you go back to the magnesium I recommended? She said, no, you know what? I called up that chiropractor because somebody else I know sees him and he had this like supplement and he told me I didn't even need to come in and see him. And I was given this supplement, and the supplement, was great it was a fiber supplement, and so it was great, and I took it, and I actually took it, 3 times in one day, got myself going, and then continued to take it. And I said, can you just tell me what that supplement is? And I went online, I looked it up, and I go, oh my gosh. And I said, are you still taking it? She says, yep, I'm taking it twice a day, et cetera. I said, well, the second ingredient on there is licorice root that spikes blood pressure. I said, you can't be on a blood pressure medication, first of all, and take this fiber supplement. But second of all, if we take you off this fiber supplement and we put you on your magnesium, I have a good guess that all of this is going to get back to where it should be. And so that's not to say, like, I was right, the chiropractor was wrong, or the doctor by not asking did anything, any of those pieces. The piece to take away there is when more people have all of your information, you have a better chance of just getting a better diagnosis and getting better outcomes. And so doctors really appreciate somebody who comes in. And I have people on their phone, just like you would put in case of emergency, a name, or you might have a couple of names and phone numbers. I have people take pictures of the fronts and the back of any of their supplements and their medications and keep a folder in there. Because I have encountered where people have had weird things happen, either in this country or in other countries, and you want the doctor, by having more informed information, is just going, things like fish oil and going into a surgery, like that's just helpful in terms of somebody knowing what could be going on with your blood or your blood pressure, or any of those things. So again, I love to use stories because I think we can all relate to that piece. Like if I was constipated, I would want to take the first thing that I could find that would resolve the issue, and I would never be thinking that it could trigger or exacerbate, elevated blood pressure. And yet, as soon as I put that together for her, she's like, I can't even believe this. Like this all started around that time, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think it is that bit of we have to remember to be better not storytellers, but when you're recounting, we have to make sure that we're accounting for all of what we're doing and informing our healthcare providers of that. And that goes back to the journaling piece, which is the reason it's so critical is I can't even tell you what I had for dinner last night. I have to start, Ashley, who is somebody who does journal, so that if somebody does on a podcast does ask me what I had for dinner, I can go back and look at it because, if somebody, if I happen to have an allergic reaction to something, I would rather that somebody has the information about what could possibly be a factor.
This sort of feeds nicely into something that I'm interested in. For the busy bachelor like me that doesn't really cook that much, but is concerned about maintaining energy, staying fit, etc., I find that one of the challenges is really picking a theme and sticking with it. It seems like there's a real overflow of information, and you can go into the fad diet world, into the cleanse world. You have vegetarians versus vegans versus pescatarians versus paleos, all seemingly have attributes to them that work or don't work. How do you help people keep that straight in their mind, and I guess in some ways, how do you transcend those labels so that people are using the good information that comes from those theories and then applying it well?
Yeah, and I think it's I've actually learned more about this from looking at how people approach the same things outside of the nutrition category. So one of the things that I will say, and I mean it like totally in a so first of all, I should back up and say I started my career working in advertising, selling people sugared cereals. So mea culpa, right? So this is in a totally non-judgmental space, and when I say this, I include myself in the mix. We have not done a very good job of helping people understand how to assess their better nutrition and even what better nutrition is and isn't. And when I say we, it's the entire space of nutrition educators, doctors, practitioners, all of that whole space, and quite honestly, even teachers, school teachers, and parents. And so a lot of that comes from information that we haven't gotten ourselves. And so one of the things that I really focus on, and what I started to say is that I look at industries and case studies outside of the nutrition space to really be able to look at that, right, and get better advice. And I guess in that space, where I was talking about the financial piece, it's like what you really want to do in any situation. And I actually learned a lot from, and there's a guy that's going to be on my podcast. His name is Jocko Willenick, and he also has a great podcast. It's the whole podcast world. But he has a book, Extreme Ownership. And I learned a lot from actually the military and how the military focuses on handling situations, because in particular ones that have the potential to be highly stressful or highly emotional. And when we're talking about our own health, our weight, our goals, any of these things, they can be highly stressful and highly emotional. And sometimes they can be life and death, and often they are extremely significant. And so extreme ownership is a great and really looking at how the military functions in this space is really, I think, offers us a lot of value. One of the pieces in there that I took the most value from is certainly recognizing that you do have to triage or you have to prioritize better. And so I think to answer your question, one of the things that I noticed with someone like yourself is that we can be very good at identifying maybe all the things that we should be doing, or even putting together a picture and laying out a plan of all the things that we're going to do. But the reality is we can't do everything at once. And so what I really focus on in that space is saying, okay, so what's going to get you the biggest better health bang for the bite or the sip or the not having the bite or the sip or the extra, or that kind of a thing. And so, what I'll unpack in that situation is, are you not sleeping? Is it something where if somebody doesn't have good sleep behavior, then I can't talk to them very well about making better choices, especially as the afternoon rolls along, because at that time we're seeing the negative impact of not having great sleep, right? We want more of the carbohydrates, we want the sweets, we want that kind of a thing. And if you're somebody who either lives in a place like in New York where cooking is less the norm, or if you're in a life space where you either, it's like, hey, I don't want to cook for one, or buying groceries for one is really frustrating or expensive, or stuff goes bad, then what we'll do on that part is very much focus on what are better things to order when you're either ordering in or eating out, but also what can we do in the kitchen at home that's more of what I'll call borrowing from IKEA, some assembly required, and maybe it's more about just having an introduction to the freezer and how having stuff available there, or maybe it's like, hey, let's just make sure we throw everything into a blender once a day, not because I don't think you should use your teeth, but it's a great way to make sure that you get in some organic fruits and vegetables, some great spices and things like that, and that's something that doesn't even have to require a lot of space or a lot of time or a lot of grocery shopping, any of that stuff. So I think it's really about more the strategic implementation of what should be prioritized and how that's what the trickle down is from that.
That's good stuff. Anything that gets me closer to John Hamm and away from John Goodman, I think I'll take that. But
I like that. Yes.
I have a couple of topics. It's really more from a bullet point form that come up as things that people, I'm sure, ask about. And Just wanted to get your take on that. Water consumption. I mean, we hear all the time that you should be drinking at least a liter or two of water a day to keep things going. How much is too much, too little? Where does that fit in your worldview?
Yeah, it's so funny that you asked that because I was just before we spoke, I was just signing off on the final approval. So under my Better Nutrition membership, I have what I call Better Nutrition Tools, and there are a series of evaluations. So I was on TV this morning talking about evaluating your magnesium and evaluating your potassium and evaluating your calcium and all of that. And the one that I get so often is the water question. And so it really, the water question and the protein question are probably the two that I get most often. And so I have evaluations for those as well. And the key thing is that there are, again, this is a place where to make things simple, we have created things like either 8 glasses of water. You should drink 8 glasses of water a day. But then people are like, okay, well, how big is a glass? Or how often does that mean I have to have it 8 times, or do I have it all at one time? Does coconut water or watermelon count as water? What about the water in my coffee? What about the, and on, right? And then I have
sounds like you need a lawyer.
Yeah, totally. And then other places, and I think it's so funny because in order to make it simple, we came up with like 8 glasses of water a day. And my whole thing is like, so if you think you're not drinking enough water, drink some more water. That's usually the place that we start at, right? Especially if you're having a glass of wine, then also drink a glass of water. But another one that is often used is taking half of your body weight in pounds. So if you weigh 150 pounds, dividing it in half, and that would be 75, and then splitting up those 75 ounces into, if that's your water number, then that's a good starting point, and that's a great place to say, like, okay, so if I'm at about 75, I'm going to round up to 80 because I like the math easier, then I might need 8 10-ounce glasses or 10 8-ounce glasses and get my 80 ounces in during the day. But with all of that, it really comes down to, and this is why in the evaluation I help you figure out that number, and then I go through what actually counts as water, what should not count as water, i.e. things that have like fake colors in them and artificial sweeteners and vitamins that are not naturally found in water added to them and not really good sources of those vitamins. Things like that. But what could count are your fruits and vegetables. Your coffee actually could count, but you can't count all your coffee if you're having 60 ounces of coffee in the day. We should probably talk about other things if that's the case. But, so we kind of go through all of that. And then I also look at where do you live, what's your exercise like, and I'll give you just some add-ons like, hey, add 10 ounces for this or add 10 ounces for that. But for your listeners, so first of all, for your listeners, that's a super easy, so when you join the membership, it's a monthly membership, you have access to all of those evaluations. And my recommendation is usually to pick 1 or 2 in a month that you really want to focus on and then get the information and then work on implementing it. And I also have menus. I don't have a menu for the water, but I have a menu for like the magnesium and some of these other ones. And the key thing with water, and as the daughter of a urologist, I learned this, is that water going in you is not where the issue of water stops. And so if water goes in you and immediately goes out of you, or if you're somebody who is going to the bathroom all the time, then that's going to tell me that the water is actually not getting absorbed into the cells. And so that's where I'm going to look at the potassium and the sodium. And then another area might be that if you're drinking water, but you notice that you're still very thirsty, that can be a factor. And we can look at, that could be anything from wanting to take a look at your blood sugar levels to the potassium and hydration. And it could also have to do with other nutrients. I was mentioning magnesium and some of the other pieces. So I think it really, knowing your better water range and knowing how to allocate it throughout the day is really important. I basically operate super simple, which is you should be pit stopping for water at least as often as you're pit stopping for other nutrition during the day. And the reason behind that is that in all of your better nutrition pit stops, like so if I'm stopping for a snack, if I'm stopping for a meal, I just call them nutrition pit stops. And if you're pit stopping, there are nutrients in there that are what we call water soluble, which means that water needs to escort those nutrients into your cells. So if you're not consuming water, then they're not getting where they need to go. And so it's like, I don't care if you're, good on you that you're eating a kale, or great on you that you're having, quinoa or wild salmon or some other deemed superfood. But those nutrients, many of them require water in order to get into the cells. So we should be pit stopping at least that often. And so what I'll do with your better water range, if it's the 75 or the 80 ounces, is I will split it up throughout the day, because what we also don't want to do is overwhelm the body. A lot of my clients or patients will come in the door and tell me that, they'll throw back 40 ounces of water in the morning, but then they don't touch water all day. And then when they come home at night, they'll have more water. And it's like, wow, that's kind of hard. That's harder on your bladder and on your system. But at the same time, I usually will also point out to them, that iced tea that you had at lunch was also some water. Or, when you do have, if you want to swap your coffee latte for an Americano with a little bit of, milk or something in it, then we can actually get more water in that way. So part of it is also just getting strategic about how to get more of the water in. So that was you thought it was a bullet-pointed quick one, but you can see just how messy it's gotten, right, in the world of what is and isn't better nutrition.
Well, no question about it. And that leads to two other thoughts. And you hear old wives' tales or rules of thumb about speed of eating, taking your time while you're eating, and that makes a big difference, not only in probably good digestive health, but also in terms of feeling fuller and maybe dealing with portion control a little bit better, but also timing of eating. The idea that you should really load up on breakfast and have light dinners. Where does that fit in your thinking?
Yeah. Well, those old wives that, they probably lived to be old because they were really healthy, because they were paying attention to these things. They're not tales. It's good advice. And I think, a key piece in that is that, so can you eat something quickly if you're on the go? And is that oftentimes better for you than not eating something, getting hangry and not being likable or performing well or overeating later? Absolutely. Is it better for us to not eat quickly and in a rush more often? Absolutely. So I think, we have to give ourselves permission to be real and to acknowledge that life happens. One of the things that I like about liquid nutrition is that, and so I mean soups or smoothies or, some juices, especially if they're made with organic vegetables and not too high in fruit sugars, then those are going to be great options for you if you are on the go and want to have something fast where your digestive system is not going to be as overwhelmed as if you threw back like a whole sweet green salad in like a second, that kind of a thing. So I think that there are ways that we can strategically say, like, when I am in a hurry, I make this choice. But you're also right, the body doesn't really have time to register. So the body actually is like, think of the person, the cashier checking you out at the grocery store that's like lifting up the apple, checking the code, passing it along, picking each product, et cetera. The body is doing that and wants to do and figure out what it should be doing with each of those things. And so if you do it super fast, then there are more likely that mistakes are going to be made, or more likely that the person's going to try to work really quickly and just throw stuff into the bags. And if at the bottom of the bag was your eggs, like, who's to blame in that situation? And so that's an analogy to basically say that both digestively, so you're absolutely right, the things you picked up on, digestively, how it impacts your overall energy, whether the body actually registers how much it actually got in order so how it feels full, but also do you feel satisfied? So a lot of people will recount, and I have this personal experience of, if I have something, even if it's absolutely delicious, but if I have it really quickly, then I haven't necessarily enjoyed it to the full extent. And so what I will try to do is tell people to take at least 2 bites, really savoring those 2 bites. And then if you need to eat more quickly, great, or maybe you'll actually notice that you could be happy with less of it, have less of it, and go that route. So again, we have to match things for our lifestyles, and I don't want to tackle some of the most successful people I know. I understand, and in particular, I think fondly of my father, a surgeon who would say, like, I would have a tiny amount of, it took me so long to make sure that he ate something in the middle of the day, right? Like, so I don't want to take that away. And so him eating something quickly, I get, or, I talked about the military piece, like if it's like, okay, we have, 10 minutes for chow and then we're on to the next thing. I'm not the person to say, let's change all of those behaviors, but I think, especially when we're talking about, I think we have to recognize the times when we are not, when we can actually say, you know what, I need to allocate more time to my eating, and that's going to be really important. And so I think on the second part, the timing is, there are all these different things, right? Like breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, dinner like a pauper. If that works for you, it depends on really how a king eats. I've seen some kings eat not great, and I don't love their breakfast, and I mean that very truthfully. There are a couple of kings that are my patients, and I think in that way, part of what I'm making a joke about it, but I think it's also important to just say size is not really the factor there. So what we really want to understand is that when we wake up in the morning, we're dehydrated. But we also should hopefully have a clean slate, but it's going to depend on in that our body got, allocated and got done with everything that needed to do overnight. It is going to depend a bit on how we slept. And so I do have people who didn't sleep well, and as a result, they wake up really hungry. And their hunger is because the body is like, I need something to give me some get up and go, right? And that might be turning to coffee or to more caffeine, and others may just turn to a higher quantity of food. What we never want to do is overwhelm our system, our body. And so no matter if it's dinner time or breakfast time, your gas tank is still the same size as a gas tank. And so I think if we use that analogy, I use a lot of car analogies in nutrition, then it really does come down to what are the choices I'm going to make to fill up that gas tank. And I do find that especially if somebody's trying to trim some fat or really struggling to lose weight, I work with a lot of perimenopausal and menopausal women who are just like, why is this not happening? It's like just so frustrating to even lose a quarter of a pound. And at that point, I will do a little bit of a dance with saying maybe we'll have less carbohydrate, and I'm not going to have you have more fat or protein, but if you are hungry, I'm going to increase your amount of non-starchy vegetables. And I'll do that in the evening because I don't find that we really need or benefit from those extra carbohydrates in the evening, and that might be a way to help the body reduce a little bit of the fat. But overall, I do believe that we really need to think about our bodies more like a race car, in that our body wants to come to the starting line, have the fuel that it needs in it, the air in the tires, the gas in the tank, the windshield wiper fluid, whatever else, the car's cleaned and ready to go. And then we run to our next pit stop, and we're usually, and then we reload, and we're not reloading with like an extra tank of gas, right? Because that weighs us down. And I think that that's a great way of thinking about and really what runs counter to that massive breakfast idea, which also, by the way, is just a very unfair thing to do to your digestive system. Another analogy I would give is if you walked into the door, and maybe this happens to many of us on a regular basis, or you open up your computer and your boss dumps like the entire day's work on your desk before you've sat down, right? Or you open your email and it's like, you have 672 emails. How much better would you feel if it was like, oh, you have 30 emails, and you're like, I know I can get through 30, and then in another couple of hours it was like, oh, you have 30 emails, or your boss said, hey, you just got here. I'd love it if you could get this done before, 11, and then at 11, why don't you come into my office and we'll go over what I'd like you to do until 2 o'clock and kind of go through that way. So A, that would make for better bosses. B, that would, whoever can create that app for my computer, please do so now, and if it exists, please share it with me. And, and 3, think of your digestive system that way.
So to circle back to caffeine, it's become it's almost like its own food group for many people. I somehow enjoy a coffee very, very infrequently, and I don't really rely on it to get up or to get through the afternoon, which is, I guess, a blessing in this day and age. But it's definitely not most people's lifestyles. How do you manage around that?
Yeah, I don't think that, I think the key thing, and this is like one of those assessment pieces. So there are people and patients of mine that absolutely cannot have caffeine. And, and it could be during pregnancy, right? And I have women who are just like, oh, like the one thing. So I'm like, okay, so we've just got to find another one thing, and I am not the person that turns around and says, oh my gosh, the gift of having a baby. No. When you want your coffee, or you want, so we'll figure out like what's that thing, like, that we can replace that with, and how are we going to help you feel better. And so that person, the person that has high anxiety, the person who has digestive issues, may not, especially if it's like an acid reflux, they may not do well with coffee, but maybe there's something, or maybe there's a different way we can have coffee, that kind of a thing. But if you're somebody who should not be having it, then what I have to do is find something, we have to turn around and say, okay, what can you have in that space? For the rest of everyone else, there's really a question. There is caffeine sensitivity, and there's caffeine sensitivity, and there is salt sensitivity or sodium sensitivity. And it's different for everyone, right? And it also really is different at different life stages. And so this is me talking to you on the phone, not having had any caffeine today. So I do enjoy having caffeine, but the problem is when I have it, like, no one can keep up with me. I learned very early on after doing 2 shots of espresso before going on the Today Show that, like, that can never happen again, because I was done in 1 minute and 10, and the host was like, so, what do we do? We've got 4 minutes, on this part. So I think in that way, you want to recognize how caffeine is going to impact your overall performance. Caffeine is a stimulant. It is not going to provide you actual energy. It is a stimulant. So I think that's a really important distinction, because energy is going to come from our food. Energy is what our body, our car, if you will, gets, that's the fuel for it to run. And so I think with the stimulant part, you need to understand what happens with stimulation. So it stimulates you. So that is going to stimulate muscle contraction. That can be amazing. It's great before a workout. It can be great for fat burning, but it can also stimulate your bowels. And so it may not be great if you're going on a long run, or it may not be great if you're going to be away from a bathroom, or if you're somebody who is going in to give a talk and now you're going to be nervous and, it's going to make you sweat more or go to the bathroom more, or any of those things. So I get very graphic in my nutrition discussion.
No, it's important. You got to watch out for these things.
Totally. And so the caffeine piece is really understanding, what's your sensitivity? How much stimulation do you need? And what are you going to use that for? So for me, I fall into the category of loving to use it for sports performance and that piece. And also, I'm really not good at sitting still for a long time at a conference. And so, I may use caffeine there, but I've noticed that there are different types of caffeine. So tea for me is a better, it's more of a rolling hill than a peak and valley, right?
Right.
And then there's the other part, which I find, which is if you don't like the taste of your caffeine, then we run into a whole other problem, which is you're going to do a lot of things to make your caffeine that you feel that you need really taste good, and that's often where we run into nutrition issues. So what I also try to do is figure out what's the better way that we can help you get the better caffeine amount for you, and also have it deliver and be part of a package of better energy. So what I mean by that also is, if you're getting a stimulant boost from caffeine, you want to make sure that you're getting proteins and healthy fats at the same time. You can have some carbohydrate, but carbohydrates are stimulating as well, or not stimulating. They're providing you that energy. And so when you get the carbohydrate, the protein, and the fat in that moment, what's going to be great about that is it's like you're getting into your car, and now when you're flooring the gas pedal, which is the equivalent of getting the coffee, you actually have gas in the tank, right? If not, you're flooring the pedal and your body, it's like not having any gas, and you hear that horrible screech, and that's how a lot of us end up at about 10 a.m. unless we're like right in front of the coffee place and can get another coffee or make another cup of coffee. So it really is looking about at your how you're using stimulants as a total part of your nutrition. And another factor with that is that a lot of multivitamins, even protein powders, things like that today, are adding in things like adaptogens, which are a class of herbs. They're amazing for you, that help the body adapt better and can give you better, in that way, can give you that stimulation, but not have you have the high, because it's going to adapt to each individual, not have you have a high and then a low. But if you have that adaptogen at the same time that you're having the coffee, that's going to give you each individual person's going to have a different response. And so I think you want to just be really clear about, you want to know what you're doing, and you also don't want to test it out in a situation that might not prove good for you, like going on a road trip and having horrible road rage because you are having a lot of caffeine.
Yeah, so, no one wants that.
A lot of good conversation on caffeine.
But so one last nutrition topic before we switch gears. NutraSweet and aspartame and sort of the artificial sweeteners. I know a lot of people, myself included at one point, really gravitated toward that as a way to cut calories. But I personally have come to the conclusion that it's much closer to poison than an actual help. Where does that fit in within your program? Yeah,
so not at all. So artificial things don't fit into my program because the body just wants to figure out and use. It doesn't want to have to do a ton of figuring out, but it can figure out how to use what you're giving it if it recognizes it. And the problem with the artificial stuff, and I'll lump sugars, fats, colors, all of it into there, is first of all, we're trying to cheat, and the body is smarter than us. So we, tail between our legs, we come back and are like, oh man, and it didn't even work. Like now, my taste buds are thousands times sweeter. So an apple doesn't taste sweet to me anymore. I have to put sugar on that apple or, any of those things. But it also, we notice that, and we find that, it's not solving the health problems. It's not helping people lose weight long term. It's not, all these other pieces. And I had a lot of people that would say drink a Diet Coke as their sweet treat in the middle of the afternoon, Diet soda, I should say, so I'm not picking on Coke, but, and instead of having food, but then what would happen is it would backfire because then at 5 o'clock it was like, okay, I needed to eat everything in front of me, as I walked into the door. And so I think the cheat doesn't work and the artificial doesn't work for me because when you are putting something in or on your body more often, that's going to impact your health. And the artificial stuff deducts from your health because it's not giving, whether or not it's bad for you is just a secondary point. The first point is it's not giving you something that the body uses and uses well. And so I think that's the strongest argument that I have. The layering on top of that is the piece that there is so much that we cannot control for from an exposure standpoint. We can't control for what's in our air, what's all the stuff that's around us, all these different things that we're exposed to, nor do I want to live my life in fear or constantly, trying to, we've seen people where it's, who were obsessed or currently are obsessed with the antibacterials and trying to always be clean and all this stuff. And it's like, hold on a second. That's actually not healthy for you either. You want the body to have to do its workload. But in order to do its workload better, it needs to have better resources. And the resources come from your food and your beverages. And so the artificial stuff just has no, it's not in my space at all. That is a hard and fast line between what I call chemistry lab projects, which were awesome for chemistry class, but not for what we want to be putting in or on our body.
Cool. So let's shift now to something that I find sort of equally fascinating is how you've turned what I would describe as, a nutrition practice into a kind of a media brand. You've got clients who are individuals and you've got companies and brands and organizations in addition to dealing with all of the media. How do you organize your time? How have you found a way to delegate and to be able to do what you do and at the same time find a way to scale that?
Well, I'll let you know when I have and have it in that way. So several different things have happened at different points in time in my career. I think that I'm probably no different than any other business person. And yet, I would say really, and this is being very honest, and I'm not one to this is just super saying it as it is. I don't think I paid attention to owning and running a business until about the last 3 or 4 years. There's a lot of great stuff that happened because of that. So what I focused on early on was knowing the stuff I needed to know to be able to help people. And then the second part was really being able to help as many people as I possibly could. And that was when I was working with patients 6 or 7 days in Los Angeles a week, and sometimes having very demanding patients who wanted to have me on call, so I let them do that as well. And what I actually noticed is it was keeping me from my better health, but I also noticed that in that early time, I was able to do all of that. I was building a business. The more patients I saw, the better I got exponentially during that time period. I was working in a gastroenterologist's office, so a lot of my patients were coming to me for digestive issues. So it helped me really quickly see both what were the challenges with the information that people were getting or not getting, and also what were the tools I needed to be providing. So during that time period, I was young, I was relatively healthy, and it was like, okay, then I'm going to, in that space and time, it was okay for me to not focus as much on myself. Part of the backup to that was that in the process of deciding to become a dietitian, I had spent a lot of time, I mentioned my digestive issues and stuff before, working on my own health, and so I was pretty dialed into where I needed to be. But I will say during that time period, there were some things that I started to not do as well with. And then one of the other things I did at that space, and I highly recommend whether it's getting a coach or whether it's getting a therapist, for me, I got a therapist for my business. That's going to sound like super LA story. But the reason I did it is I needed to be working with somebody who was also bound by HIPAA privacy and my privacy in a clinical setting, because part of what I was struggling with was how can I, first of all, not try to fix everyone and rather help them fix themselves. And then the second part of it is how can I also not take their stories home so that, or just when I get home, not want to hear anyone else's stories. And that wasn't boding well for my relationships or just how I felt, and you encounter as a practitioner, people really let you in deep, and especially when I'm asking the kind of questions. And I was, hearing stories and learning about people, and, at times I would just be so sad. And literally, I would leave, my office was in Beverly Hills, I would leave and I would go shopping, and I didn't have a lot of money, and I would go spend money in Beverly Hills that I probably didn't need to be spending, because that made me happy, right? I wasn't going to go overeat. I wasn't a shopaholic, but I probably was pretty close on that part. So I think in that space, a lot of the initial groundwork that I did ended up playing out. But as I said, it is not stuff that I focused on from a business standpoint. The world is very different today in the business of nutrition, and so things happened serendipitously for me. My dad's favorite quote is that Louis Pasteur, chance favors the mind that is prepared, or the person that is prepared. And I really think that a lot of what I was doing early on was preparation. And so I ended up getting somebody wanting me to be on TV. I had met a doctor earlier on who was writing a book and wanted my help with the book. And in doing those things, they ended up pushing me into more of the media world. I really loved it. I never thought about anything until I got a call one day from someone who had seen me on TV, and she's like, "You're such a pretty girl." And I was like, "Well, that's great. Did you get the information that I communicated in the segment?" And, and she was like, "No, I just wanted to tell you that I want to help you because you look so unattractive on TV." And I was like, "What?" Like, you just had this moment. You're like, so I'm
Thank you for the criticism.
Yeah, totally. I was like, well, that's, I was like, come on that part. And, but the interesting thing was that my friends who would say, "You're so approachable," or "We find it so easy to talk to," or my patients would, when I went on TV, it was so important for me. I think I was like dressing up like an older person. Like I was like, I want someone to take me seriously. And, I was probably more robotic in that way. So as much as that wasn't fun to hear, it was helpful for me. And I remember actually going to a friend of mine who is a makeup artist, and at the time, she introduced me, because part of the reason I didn't want to wear makeup all the time was I didn't like what was in the ingredients. She introduced me to some of the toxin-free makeups or lower, and that kind of thing, and showed me a couple of things I could always do. And that entered me into the, okay, now I have to care about my appearance on television space, and kind of, and what the media world was. And especially in LA, you get a pretty quick indoctrination into that space and, doing some reality TV. And then at the same time, I had brands that were reaching out to me and were saying, "So you love our products. We would love to pay you to share that love." And so I navigated that space, I think, pretty well. I feel really good about, I can say it this way, I feel really good about the way I've navigated that space. When I was paid for things, I never was exclusive to a company, and I always would talk about that relationship. Like, "Hi, I'm here on behalf of," or "This partner brought me here," or, "I like this product." And really it would be products that I was taking or using or that whole thing. And there was just a lot less of it at that time. And so I felt comfortable doing it, and I felt that it was a great addition to my business. But any of the other pieces of my business that have added on have all come from requests that people and practitioners have made of me that they needed tools, and what could I offer. And so what I mean by that is doctors were consistently reaching out to me, as were my patients, saying, "I went into the grocery store, you told me to buy organic bread, I have no idea what is it this one or is it that one?" Or more importantly, I'll say more importantly because it could be more dangerous, "Hey, is this the right supplement or is this not the right supplement, that is the one that's okay to take with my medication," that kind of a thing. And so I started this list, and I literally like pages of lists, and I used to handwrite everything out. Thank goodness for the internet. And I created the Ashley Koff Approved, which is now it's always been a nonprofit project. I've never been paid to evaluate a product. And today, 15 years later, I've evaluated over 70,000 products. And that still exists on my website. And if you wonder about a product, and if I think that it is a better one, and I'm just looking for better quality, I'm just trying to get us off any of the stuff that we should not be having, then that's a place that you could go. And from that took me to another place where people, in particular specific to where I was living, in LA, a lot of my clients played various different roles in the entertainment industry. And so they would say, like, I know, so-and-so eats this in her trailer, but we have no good snacks, and we're here for 14-hour days. And then I also had executives who were like, we are there for 14-hour days, and the craft services, I literally had one comedian who would come in and he would just have X's on his journal, and he would hand it to me, and he'd be like, crap day, crap day, crap day. And I'm like, what? And he's like, instead of craft services, I call it crap services. And I'm like, okay. So, I set about creating the Ashley Koff approved craft services project, which was also free. You're going to notice a theme here. It was free, and what I did was I connected the companies that I liked with the craft services, and they donated products. And so, yes, I know there are people in a need all over the place that these companies also donate to, and that was not lost on me. But this was really important for me because what we did was we upgraded the nutrition options. There were still crappy options, but we upgraded the nutrition options on set, and that meant that I had more patients that were successful. And so through things like that, I started to get other opportunities. But when I say I didn't really focus on my own business, even whether at a point in time when social media started, I was one of the early dietitians and nutrition experts on Twitter and early on the Huffington Post. And Huffington Post was great because we ended up creating a true health makeover there. I turned to them and said, hey, I'd love to do this because I've done it for magazines before, but I don't get to really say what my clients did. In the makeovers, it's more somebody from the magazine is writing it. And so things like that were fun. And I was on Twitter. And then I started getting asked questions on Twitter. So I would be answering those questions and referring people there. And then lo and behold, there are things like Twitter parties. And then over time, people would say, hey, would you do these Twitter parties? So I was able to create a following and do all of these things, but I wasn't really creating a business. I was certainly getting paid for my services and getting paid at a good value on that part. And I really appreciated the collaboration and all of those pieces. But what I wasn't doing was asking of others to focus on me and, as a result, build a brand and a business. So it was kind of just a different way of building it. And the only reason I point that out now is that in the last couple of years, I have noticed that I have had to, and really I've been pushed into a place of saying, well, I have to be more focused on what it is that I have to offer. And so that really, and also why am I doing this? Because about 4 years ago, around the time I moved to D.C., I was also saying, do I really still want to be doing this? The business of nutrition there are so many people out there talking about nutrition, people, brands, projects. The same hosts that I would go on as the nutrition experts have published I would go on their show as a nutrition expert. They have published books on nutrition. It's like, so you're sitting there and it's like, why, and yet we have a population that is not getting any healthier. And so for me, what I took some time and business coaching and came to learn is that I've always been in the business of identifying better nutrition tools and helping people take the information, focus on what information they need, get rid of hopefully the rest so we can reduce this infobesity that's plaguing us all. And by focusing in on what you actually need to know, now how can we turn that into what you need to be doing? And so I really came around to this space of focusing on better nutrition tools. So in all of that, I have had the classic Hollywood, I've had agents, I've had publicists, and I think people have been great for me for the part of the business that I was in at that time, and they've also not worked for me. And so, navigating some of those legal breakups and navigating some of those, non-legal breakups or just deciding to not have those services. I have also had one person in particular who started off as a personal assistant for me in California, really to watch my dog and to help me with some of the things around my home because when I was traveling. And he became more and more passionate about my business. And today he's the director of operations for my business, and he knows all of the. He's exposed to and understands and his growth is something that I've invested in because I recognize that you don't just want to have the right people on the bus, you want them to be in the right seat. And I brought somebody onto the bus in a different seat, and so to bring them and to consistently bring him into the right seat, and now with other people that we're bringing on board, I want to make sure that they have the training, because oftentimes it's really, and for me in the business that I do, it's really about having someone that I trust and who understands my intentions and my values. And if that means that they didn't come from a background, they weren't previously a director of operations for a huge company or, whatever, then now I have to look and say, how do we train you to get you there? So,
there's nothing more rewarding than to be able to develop people. And if they've got the horsepower to do a lot of different things, and you're able to develop them to be able to advance your cause, that feels really good.
Absolutely. And the biggest takeaway for me is, so now I have a couple of interns. I have him. We just got him an assistant, so that's kind of fun. And watching him learn to manage has been really great on that part too. But the best part for me is in all of this has been learning to be a better business person myself. And so one of the things I think is really interesting and necessary, whether you go into quote-unquote business or whether you go in and become a healthcare practitioner or whether you're a blogger or any of those things, I think you really need to look at who are you as a business person and what's your secret sauce and what's, how do you communicate and all of those pieces. Because I think that that's who you are as a business should be influenced by who you are as a person. And what I was doing was a lot of the things that were great about me in my personal life, I was not applying those to my business life. And I think that learning to do that has made me a better business person. And part of that has been, I have amazing friends, and I'm like, I don't need a ton of friends. And I would never say that my friends have to audition or come from having been a great friend of so-and-so in order to be a great friend for me, But at the same time, I also am really good at vetting and not having and saying, sorry, you actually don't make the cut. Like you may just be an acquaintance. And in my business space, I needed to do a better job of relegating people to acquaintance spaces or saying, you're totally awesome, we're just not going to have a relationship, and that kind of a thing. And so that's been very empowering for me.
The ability to say no, that is a really good piece of advice. And it's something that I've had to learn too. I've got lots of professional connections I enjoy being with, and I tend to learn something from them, but it's not necessarily additive to my practice or to my business. We just aren't in the same space. That's not to say that we can't be useful to each other, but when you're trying to manage your time and manage your resources, I guess I equate it to a bullseye. There's some people who are in the bullseye and, you've got to really take care of them, and, there's a back and forth and there's something that really works. And then there are people that are in different stages as they move outside the bullseye. And people in the bullseye can get out of the bullseye pretty quickly, and other people can graduate and get into the bullseye.
Yeah.
Just it can be a flexible thing.
And maybe this is like the DC, like the newly DCer in me, but my business coach had me do it as an exercise of, and she termed it, who's in your cabinet. And so I had actually created a cabinet, and I had rules for who's in your cabinet. And like a cabinet for a president or whomever, you realize I want people for different strengths, right, and people who for different parts of my business or different parts of my life. And then I had tiers coming down from that. And so very, very similar to what you're talking about. And gosh, it's a great exercise because it also, at different points in time, you can turn around and say, you know what, I want to promote someone. Like, I want this person in my cabinet. Well, what am I going to need to do in order to bring them into my cabinet? And also, what communication am I going to need to have with them? Because, to be in my cabinet is like a pretty sweet spot, and it's really important. And I want them to know that I have I'm like, wow, I am investing in you and investing in us and, in that space. And so, to me, it's been really valuable to go through that exercise. And, it brings up something that's on a parallel path in the nutrition and health space is like, how often do we do all of these things, right? And so, whether it's business coaching or yesterday somebody gifted me the 5-minute journal, and so I'm like, okay, I'm going to try doing the 5-minute journal. But then this morning I was like, ooh, got the 5-minute journal, but I've also got my meditation app, and suddenly I woke up this morning more stressed than I've ever been with 2 tools to de-stress me, So I think part of it is just being clear about setting time frames. And so, for example, I like to have people do the digestive evaluation and the tune-up on a quarterly or at least twice a year. I think it's really important to assess where your digestive system is. You're not what you eat, you are what you digest and absorb. And so you need to make sure that that's a top priority. That needs to be happening. But some of this other stuff about, the water and the magnesium, those things based on where you are today, may be things that may need to be a priority. But there are also things that we can turn around and say, you know what, those are actually things that I'm going to focus on, and I'm actually going to put them on my calendar for a different time period and address them at that point. And so I think moving things around and putting things in priority in the way that you would at work or, in any other space, both for your health and your mental health, are really important in that way too.
Ashley, terrific. Thank you very much for being on. What is the best way for listeners to keep track of you and your services?
Thanks. Yeah, so the membership and my blog and all that stuff is on my website at ashleykofapproved.com. And then if you're on social media, it's some version of that or Ashley Koff, and I love to interact with you in both places.
I like to tell the story that the last time we saw each other was a few years ago, and you were in New York, and I made the massive faux pas of meeting you at a steakhouse at my suggestion, and you were not only willing to meet me there, and we had a good time to catch up, but you were willing to be on my podcast even after that. So
exactly.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's right. I wouldn't be worth it should be like organic sea salt or something. But as a practitioner, if I couldn't walk in and have a meal at a steakhouse, and do it hopefully better. So absolutely.
Excellent stuff. Ashley, thank you very much for being on.
Thanks, Frazer. It was great.
Thanks for listening to the Frazer Rice Podcast. We've been speaking with Ashley Koff, registered dietitian and one of the top nutritionists in the country. Be sure to check out FrazerRice.com for additional content and be on the lookout for new podcasts in short order. Thanks again and have a great day.